Hello there everyone and welcome back. It's time to continue on with my drive to legendary rank with my Imperial Navy fleet, and I think after another episode or two of this, I think I'm going to switch on over to my, 2 Overlords, Dictator, and 3 Tyrant fleet, or at least technically my 6 cruiser fleet for the remainder of my run with the Imperial Navy, and then maybe I'll try something a little bit different, assuming I make legendary rank. I have a Dictator fleet in mind since someone asked about something about, a carrier type fleet, and I think that's what I'm going to resort to. Since the fighters themselves, going all exclusively fighters, I don't think works that well with the Imperial Navy due to their slower speed and the sheer how large your ships have to be, either a Grand Cruiser or an Emperor, to get at least 4 hangar bays to get the large number you want. So I'm going to compromise a little bit with the torpedoes on top of like the Dictators, as I said, 2 fighter bays, since they synergize well together. But that's neither here or there. This is an Imperial Navy mirror match, and we're face off against a Red Alex. Red Alex? I kind of want to say Red Alexi, but that's not really the case. And I feel like I fought against them before, but what we're countering this time around is going to be, 5 Tyrants? And a Grand Cruiser that's got Micro Warp Jump on it. And it's just basically going to be on its own and kind of hanging in the corner, essentially. So kind of what we've seen before. It's hiding the gas cloud currently in the top middle, but I'm trying to remember, is this 5 Tyrants? I'm pretty certain it's 5 Tyrants. It's looking like 5 Tyrants there. So once I realize that on the detection of the fighters, since there's no gas clouds nearby, so it prompts me to just detect them as soon as I can, and maybe get some free early damage in as a result. Since they have the higher hit point pool and they technically have more torpedoes than me, with me having access to only 4 cruisers as opposed to 5. On the plus side though, the Tyrants are a lot more close range oriented, so if I'm able to somehow stall and engage at maximum range possible, that should help a ton with at least getting some of that early damage in to soften them up. That's the idea anyway. It remains to be seen if I can take advantage of it. Although, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I feel like I'm not really happy with my performance here, since it relies heavily on me getting the kills almost immediately, which is something I'm going to be trying to do, as we kind of seen already, with sporadically bringing my cruisers in waves. And there's the indication of the 5 Tyrants. They're all braced for impact. And they have armor piercing ammo and shield. I believe that's the additional armor to the shields. So I know what I'm up against here. And I can't remember, did I change priority to the engine or did I stick with the deck? Because destroying the engine actually would be pretty good here. Since again, they don't have short burn torpedoes being made apparent now with the torpedoes still launching. And with their slower speed, they're almost never going to make use of their armor piercing ammo, at least with what I can get crippled before the actual engagement itself. Since if I want to actually fight this, I'm going to have to keep flying off sideways ideally, to at least get my lance shots in. I'm just not probably in the best facing or best range to maximize my damage, since they're just outside of range at the moment of even the Apocalypse. And sadly it does also mean I forfeit the third point, but that's kind of the main benefit when you're so close range oriented, have such close range firepower, so I'm forced to hang back and try and look for a window to get aggressive essentially. Although with the second torpedo salvo, I kind of forced myself to turn around. I suppose I could have done a high energy turn to speed this along, since my opponent isn't really boosting towards me just yet. At least not yet. And I don't know if these are dumbfire torpedoes or the regular damage torpedoes, or the melted torpedoes. So it would be nice to know which of those are being used, so I can actually keep that in mind for the close range engagement that's probably eventually going to happen, with me slowly being wedged into a corner. But thankfully 2 torpedo charges are spent and almost nothing was gained from it. And now I'm trying to realize, is that Grand Cruiser an Exorcist, or I'm having a hard time seeing if that's actually 4 fighter bays or not. I'm assuming it's like the Exorcist anyway. It's the only Grand Cruiser I could think of that's maybe got a bunch of fighter bays on it. But my opponent's had enough of this charade. They're boosted on in. I have a very limited window to try and do damage, and ideally cripple them as much as I can. But since they're not battle cruisers, since they don't have any dorsal turrets, there is almost no risk to me at all. And since my opponent's kind enough to just stand still, optimizing my damage and hopefully allowing for this Novacan to connect as well. It prompts a response at the very least. Maybe not the damage I would have liked, but did it actually hit the one in the middle? It did hit the one in the middle, but it was only shield damage. Maybe, just maybe, the morale damage might be impactful if I'm smart and aware about that. But we're doing a good amount of damage to this one cruiser already. Engines just now getting destroyed. But like I said, I think I prioritize the deck. And here's where I try and get my torpedo shots in. Sadly not the best hit on the first cruiser. And I think, yeah, I didn't realize that fourth cruiser on the left turned too much. But the idea, since they have more close range power and more hit points, I need to connect really damn quickly here. And hopefully, this one cruiser going in is going to help with that a lot. It connected really well, the engine's crippled, I'm hitting the stern, and here comes the Grand Cruiser I mentioned already. Which thankfully doesn't have the AC armor on the prow, so they're technically going to be ramming themselves almost as much as they're ramming me. I'm just doing a bad job with this crisis management because I let my combustion gauge burn out as an important factor too. Otherwise I could have probably killed off 2 of these cruisers immediately. Because pay attention to how long that cruiser and the stasis bomb stays alive for. Well, that's going to be correct in a moment because of the Novacan, but this is the most important thing when I'm dealing with something that has just better firepower. I need to be able to scaffold them apart piece by piece, and just now we're destroying 2 of the cruisers, but I lost 2 of mine in the process, which sadly doesn't bowl very well for equal trade. And I am going to try and get more torpedo hits in. Not working the best. Fire assaults are going to start doing some damage, but now my Apocalypse is going to take a lot of damage because of these fire assaults it just got hit with. It does have full combustion gauge though, but without the ability to do high energy turn, or even a micro warp jump could have been handy here, it is going to suffer a lot of morale damage. It's still a mess. I did manage to get a full torpedo salvo on the Grand Cruiser earlier, and because of that, it was dropping help rapidly too. Supercharged voice shield doesn't matter when my main strategy for killing you is trying to hit you with torpedoes ideally. And thankfully, all those fire assaults alone just forced this flagship out of the battle. Only benefit is actually killing it to maybe get the morale damage needed to kill off these other ships. Because now suddenly it's getting really damn tense, it's getting really damn close. What's most important is actually keeping this Apocalypse alive so that maybe it can grab the objectives for me. Gonna be a little tricky to do, because this Grand Cruiser again is going to survive a lot longer than it feels like, since my Apocalypse isn't even shooting at right at the moment. But it finally dies. Both the cruisers sadly are still intact, but there's actually enough time here. I possibly could have just had this Apocalypse go and grab a handful of these points. There's what, still there's dang it, my throat's acting up on me, I apologize. But there's still 2 frigates around maybe that are being a bit of a nuisance. So I probably could lose this matchup just because of them. But yeah, staying in this asteroid belt doesn't do me much favors, mainly because, sure, it's keeping me concealed, but the ship is currently hidden behind a wreckage there, as you're seeing. So I could have forced this thing to break. I don't have generators to do a lightning strike, sadly, which is where I probably would have tried boring this earlier. So this is an awkward predicament for me. If I'd been more decisive just flying away, because I actually could have outran this thing, I could have grabbed some points just because of the convenience of the battleship, and this frigate actually could have forced a mutiny for me over time. You can see me actually trying to use it as much as I can, so at the end of the day, I'm gonna spoil for you now. This is gonna be a loss. My battleship is gonna get destroyed because of the torpedoes from clearing this wreckage. And I did a terrible torpedo shot there as a bonus too. And I kind of completely forgot I had stances available from losing a deck. So I should have activated Brace for Impact or something to help in that regard. But my control was a little bit sloppier than I like. The high energy maneuvers were slow. And there was a poor judgment call I made there after destroying the Grand Cruiser. I probably should have gone after the objectives, which maybe would have stopped the hemorrhaging a lot, because I could have destroyed that cruiser with the frigate, I feel like, or at least force it to retreat. Alright, time for my rematch with Red Alex, and I was bitter about that loss because of how close it could have been. There was all sorts of little mistakes I made, like that falchion. Sure, if I had go grabbing points for me while this battle was ensuing, it would not have felt as terrible of a loss as it ended up being. Never mind, again, the frigate alone could have dealt with that final cruiser for me, just with melted torpedoes, on top of other things perhaps. But either way, I want vengeance, so it's time to try and get a victory after that close result, either way. But this time Red Alex is going to be mixed up their fleet a bit. Still the same concept, only they're going to be relying more on their torpedoes and ramming by going with, what, 6 Gothic cruisers this time, as opposed to the Tyrants. So I don't know honestly how I feel comparing these two matchups, if this is going to be a harder match for me because they have more health and more ramming on top of more torpedoes, or if this is going to be easier because they have the Lances are terrible at shooting down shields on their own, especially with a Gothic cruiser that doesn't really have the convenience to shoot at long range. Keep in mind, the Gothics only have 9,000 in range, where almost every other Lance in the game that you would at least consider using have at least 13,500 range at the minimum, and the rest are all like 18,000 before lock-on stance. But this is the reveal of at least 6 ships. The Grand Cruiser is again hiding in the gas cloud, so there is that going on there. And again, I am contemplating if I want to destroy the deck or the engine. At least this time I do prioritize the engine, because again, it's like I said, they have the hit point pool, they have the raw firepower and ramming potential, since my battle cruisers don't really offer a lot in the damaged front. Sure, they're Armageddons, but even Overlords would be hard pressed to fight these in close range brawls. What the battle cruisers have essentially is better range, better resilience to critical hits, that's an important factor, and they're really good at capturing objectives when things are getting chaotic or we're reaching the climax of the battle. So that way I can spread them out and basically perform better at grabbing objectives than my opponent, ideally. And of course, like I said, the Gothics don't really synergize the best with the Apocalypse and its lance weaponry, just because of how short range the Gothics have to be. And arguably, with the dorsal turrets on the Armageddons, I get relatively close to the same kind of lance firepower anyway. I just again miss out on the hit point pool and the torpedoes. But here's the reveal of the ships right now. I don't think I realized they're Gothics just yet, but I do think I noticed that they're all cruisers at the very least. And I try and fire torpedoes this time around, since that could have easily made the difference as well in my first matchup. And sure, my opponent's immediately going to dodge them, but what it does here actually benefits me if you see what happens. The fleet is getting split up, and if I were to engage them piecemeal at close range with my torpedoes and ramming, that probably benefits me a lot. Especially again, the Tyrants in the last match had armor piercing ammo, which do require you to be in point blank range essentially for them to actually get their bonus armor piercing. And thankfully, I am getting some good hits in as well. I'm just surprisingly not seeing much of the all-head full just yet. And this is where the stasis bomb compounds on this split force a little bit. For it prompts the first half of the fleet to turn left, where my focus is on the fleet on the right. Of course, my frigates gain isolate, but again, their lances, they're not terrifying. And I actually do get the falchion to kind of contribute in this battle some. Don't think I got any torpedo hits, sadly, which is a little unfortunate. Now, this is again looking very grim, more grim than before, considering that, again, we're dealing with more ships and torpedoes. And sadly, those first torpedoes are a complete whiff. But we got some nice soften up damage on these two ships. It's just a matter of actually killing them is the important thing. Since my opponent was being aggressive, it helps a little bit with trying to get the torpedo, the counterattack in. Since they don't have the combustion gauge to help with this maneuver. And there. One cruiser is immediately out of the fight, thankfully. My battleship's taking a bit of a beating though, is the problem. It is the focus of the RAF right now. But outside the abilities and just the morale damage it might do, the Apocalypse honestly doesn't really do a whole lot in this match, if I were to be honest. It's kind of serving its purpose by being the focus of their ire. So long as I manage the morale well. And again, here's me miscontrolling my fleet again. And the Grand Cruiser finally joins in on the fight. Because those two cruisers in back could have been doing so much more. And I just barely avoid the Grand Cruiser in this exchange. But things are looking promising. I just gotta kill off these two other cruisers for it to really pay off though. And the fire assaults should do that. Hell, they're actually ramming each other, just realized. They essentially rammed themselves. They essentially rammed themselves to death. Let's try this again. They essentially rammed themselves to death there. And that benefits me there nicely with half their fleet being gone. I'm just not going to get the torpedo hits I want here, because the torpedoes hit the wreckage and not actually the minimum range of the Grand Cruiser. Although I'm aware of the... Alright, now that we're done maybe coughing and phlegm and all that, the battleship's finally gone, sadly. I have prepared for this since I did do a rally to boost up my morale some. I still have 3 cruisers available and they have relatively good health. Just maybe not the morale that I would like. Since I kind of did an emergency repair as opposed to the Commissar's summary execution basically. So the morale is still really damn fragile at this moment. Thankfully I just dodged those torpedoes immediately, so they didn't do much. That the ship is sadly out of the fight. But the flagship, I think, is going to burn to death, especially if the Falchion could get one final say in with its torpedoes and ramming. And it connects with one torpedo, which is the damage I needed. Thankfully. We get a beautiful broadside melta. Mutinies again are triggering just because I didn't really use summary execution when I probably should have. I think I had damage engines on 1 or 2 of them, if not damage prow torpedoes. And I really need those torpedoes to get the kills. So now we're down to one ship that is mutinied, or at least in really good shape, one that's mutinied and one that's about to break right now. First is their one cruiser. So thankfully... Oh, I didn't realize they canceled the mutiny there. It still lost its engines and I still have 2 falchions, which should not be underestimated. But we are also encountering their frigates, which thankfully missed their 1 torpedo shot on this one cruiser. Now, all that's left is 1 more Cobra and this one cruiser here, which thankfully does not have its engines. And since it doesn't have the means to repair it, I'm going to send it off with some melta torpedoes ideally. Although, there's not much I could do about this mutinied ship, it's pretty much out of the fight. And that repair was at a poorly executed time. It honestly didn't make much of a difference since the Falcon was there to kind of just follow up on that. And with the remaining fire assaults, this thing is going to mutiny in a moment. And thankfully, I kind of can dodge these torpedoes relatively well. But that misclick, that preemptive repair did not do them much good there. They could have held on to that. And now finally, the cruiser is out of the fight, but it was still down to the wire, needless to say. Although, again, it comes down to a question of, was this a more fearsome fleet for me, just because of their higher emphasis on ramming and torpedoes compared to the Tyrants? Hard to say, but I still wasn't happy with my performance because, like I said, there were some lapses, some misplays, and I was definitely slow to handle that crisis management too, the thick of it. And again, in the first match, it might have been a lot better of a situation for me if I at least made use of my falchions to grab points behind them. Kind of like what happened before with the last match with what my opponent was doing. Either way, this match is over now. I have 2 points, about to grab a third, and I have the points lead. So there isn't really a whole lot left to say here. My opponent's going to kamikaze with the Cobra, and then that's going to be the end of the match here, which I think we're going to encounter in a moment, I believe. Either way, this is a victory nonetheless. There's nothing else to really say. So let's move on to our next match. Alright, match number 3, and we're going to face off against Chaos this time around. And this time, we're going to be face off with a more rare type of fleet that's almost never utilized, or at least I never go up against. And that's going to be the 4 Grand Cruisers and mass frigates with the intention of the double upgrades that are utilized with the frigates to cause boarding result damage on when the ships are destroyed. And in this case, I think we're going to be dealing with when the shields are recharged. I forget what the upgrade's actually called, but when the shields are recharged on your ships, they do 75 morale damage to your opponents that are within 4,500 unit range. I think I'll even post the ability on the screen there while we're doing the deployment, but the idea here is doing a massive amount of morale damage in a hurry. There's maybe 9-10 frigates in this group, so when all of them have to recharge their shields at once, that's 750 morale damage as soon as they recharge. Thankfully, I will say I catch on to this before it actually happens to me, so we'll get to see how easily this can be to counter to a vague extent, at least the strategy anyway. It's like I said, I play against this fleet so rarely, and the frigates do a good amount of damage because I believe these are the apostates, which have the double lances on them. So ignoring them can be problematic because they're doing a lot of damage to you, but destroying them essentially means that they're doing boarding damage to you as well, which is also problematic because with the enhanced sensor upgrades, if you have that as well, they essentially have 18,000 unit range of boarding your entire fleet. Unless you could somehow kill them outside of that range, which is almost impossible. But yeah, I kind of suspect that's what we're dealing with here. We see 4 ships, I suspect they're Grand Cruisers. And the frigates are going to be grabbing a point relatively soon in the middle there, the top middle. That's what's going to tip it off by watching how quickly the objective gets grabbed. Or at least gets captured as compared to normally being captured by cruisers or battle cruisers. Either way, I am going to have a bit of a hard time trying to do damage to these Grand Cruisers just because of the convenient placement of the gas clouds. And it's right in the way of the objectives as well for them. But I'm paying attention. I did quickly check to see how quickly the point was being grabbed. But you'll see on the mini-map, that thing gets grabbed pretty damn close to the same time as the Grand Cruisers, essentially. I believe so anyway. It's at least abnormally fast for what we're used to with a bunch of frigates. There you go. I get tipped off to it immediately that there's a handful of frigates or even light cruisers there. I'm suspecting the frigates, of course. Since I should know what I'm up against. Again, it's a lack of experience to know where its weak spots are. And this tips off that strategy even more so. There's the energy disruption bomb, which seems really odd if you don't know what it is, but in this case, it's to turn off the shields of the frigates based on what I said. So that way they can conveniently get in boarding range to just cripple my morale at the very beginning of the battle. So I don't care for this gimmick. It's simple enough to counter because, like I said, it requires 4,500 unit range for when you actually recharge your shields. And interestingly, another factor to keep in mind, if I can hit them with my own disruption bomb before their shields recharge, then they're not going to get their shield recharge in at least for another minute or so. And hell, you can see it right there. My opponent kind of is worried that he's not going to make his window. But at the same time, these frigates just piercing through my shields really quickly too. Although I wonder if I should be running away as hard as I can, because after the fact I knew its range was 4,500 units, but at 9,000 unit range like I am right now, I'm actually perfectly safe. And sadly, this disruption bomb was poorly timed for me too. I thankfully avoid all the morale damage, but if I had done that earlier, that would have been useful, but in this case, I accidentally am helping my opponent just a tiny bit. So now I just gotta kill them before the shields recharge, essentially. And again, I'm doing a terrible job with my frigates because both of them are picked off. Which is really important because these Grand Cruisers don't really have the range to their lances. And conveniently, my opponent's going to break his shields yet again, but this is where I'm taking troop damage, and I do a silly mistake here by doing call to arms, which honestly is probably not really needed. Since most of the frigates are gone and I should be engaging the cruisers at this point. So I just burnt my emergency repair and summary execution for almost no real benefits, sadly. But I still have 3 cruisers to maybe do some good damage to these things. I just no longer have my abilities, and this flagship's in a prime opportunity to do damage with. Because we got the Dictator there, we got a crap ton of fire assaults. Maybe not the ram I would have liked, but this Grand Cruiser is going to melt insanely fast. I just don't have the boarding damage, like I probably should have, to compound on that fact some. And this is a situation where I would have loved to have my abilities available, because I could have rallied the ship up top, and never mind, just boosted morale quite a bit too as a bonus. So far, this is getting a little bit messy. All my torpedoes are burnt, and I did lose one of my cruisers up top again. I don't have the rally to kind of get back into the fight. And killing this Grand Cruiser is not going to do enough morale damage at this point since all the other ships are still relatively intact. And I'm taking a lot of damage from the Scarab Swarm too, keep in mind. That's another facet that's going on here. Since that effect is still going on at this moment. So alas, I am down to just the flagship, so this match is pretty much over. Maybe I could have been a little more diligent upon... Again, it's a lack of familiarity with these skills, or the upgrades particularly. Because if I realized that the morale damage on the shield recharge was only 4,500 unit range, I could have more comfortably just hang back and just sniped them off one at a time with my lances. And that essentially would have been free damage for me, with no risk of morale damage. So I'm a little bitter about this. Because, again, I have the torpedoes and ramming potential to potentially kill these ships off immediately. I just can't be wasteful of those abilities for it to work, since the Dictator helps with the point defense as well to ensure those torpedoes connect. Alright, I'm gonna try once more against this fleet and try and understand the nuances to it. Just a little bit. Since like I hit at before, I could have executed or at least defended against those frigates a little bit better, just because I wasn't familiar with this upgrade itself and its limitations of being in point blank range to really suffer the morale damage. On top of what I said, having my own disruption bomb would have been a great way to kind of counteract that to a limited extent. It would at the very least delay their morale damage for another minute, and hopefully by then I can capitalize on their lack of shields and kill the frigates piecemeal. Because since I'm so reliant on lance damage with this fleet, shields are like the strongest defense you can have against lances, since they pierce through armor anyway, so why not hit them or have them go through something that regenerates but has no armor to begin with. Never mind the fact you're immune to critical hits while the shields are up too, which is also a nice convenience for what our Arcanist did for me there. But it was still sloppy execution and again a lack of familiarity. And this time around they're going to be utilizing the more traditional type of fleet strategy. They're not going to be using the warp charged shields or whatever the heck that upgrade's called. Since I haven't even checked that upgrade even before starting up this match. It's after the fact that I check up and understand the nuances. But in this case, they're going with the enhanced sensor range and the boarding damage when a ship is destroyed. And this is going to be a little more trickier because there's not really a lot of counterplay to that. There is one ability you can use against it. The catch is you need to still destroy the frigates before it's nullified, the effect runs off. And I'll tell you what that is afterwards. But they're not using the morale damage strategy, it's just the enhanced range and trying to kill me through boarding damage. And again, these are the Lance Grand Cruisers, but interestingly enough, they're kind of like the Gothics in a weird way, where they have really short range type of lances. Half them shoot at 13,000 units, and then the other half shoots at 9,000 units before you use the lock-on stance. So in theory, I did not know about that coming into this match, but I should have played a very passive and very slow style, especially with I still have a stasis bomb, right? That could have been really impactful to keep them at range. And they also have the gas, they're also in the gas cloud as well. And in this case, I did switch on over to using a mission dissipator to kind of help keep vision on these Grand Cruisers some. It's still a question if that was the best choice of upgrade, but at least it allows my frigates to hound the Grand Cruisers a bit more, especially with these gas clouds here. Since my opponent's not using those effects as well, but it does force the Grand Cruisers to maneuver, it does reveal them briefly, although I don't really want to shoot the frigates sadly. Each one of those have, what, 200 shield hit points? So basically 3 of those frigates is the same amount of shields as a Grand Cruiser. So I feel like that's not really worth having, or at least focusing on them without something to work in my favor. And again, I'm completely oblivious to them I'm not really considering that they don't have the warp-powered cores or whatever it's called. But I'm trying to do what damage I can. I do have a stasis bomb to pin them down, because my lances work really well with a stasis bomb. Sadly, it also works well for them too, just because they have just as many lances with the frigates. And what I'm going to do here is what I'm going to be trying to do for a good portion here is try and rotate my ships around while I'm conveniently flying to the prow. And my opponent's going to throw down another stasis bomb, which, again, if I'm on their prow, they can't shoot me. In fact, I don't even think those Grand Cruisers can shoot me right now, so this is actually a pretty good exchange so far. It's just my macro cannons that might not connect. But we force a repair on the engines there for the one Grand Cruiser, so that is primed for very fatal damage. Sadly, I burnt out my combustion gauge on the Apocalypse, which is really burdensome there. Since I want to try and absorb as much damage as I can here, since I don't have supercharged void shield at the moment. But I'm going to try and get aggressive now. My opponent did burn a little bit their combustion gauge. And I should have launched Gothic the Gothic missiles. That would have helped or the fighters is what I mean on the Gothic. That would have helped a lot with allowing these torpedoes to connect some. And again, I'm doing sloppy because these two cruisers were supposed to be the second wave up top there. And they're just not responding at all to getting in and doing the damage necessary. I am going to get the ram on the one crippled Grand Cruiser, but with no torpedoes to back it up, it's going to survive for a bit longer. We are going to get a pretty light show with the rams, and in all honesty, I should have turned my attention to his flagship some. Because my one cruiser on the right is not doing anything. It should have been preparing for another torpedo run, which would be very essential this type of matchup. It's a weird case where I have the long-range firepower, but they have the better close-range firepower, just mainly due to the number of frigates they have. It's a weird juxtaposition going on here that I was not expecting with Chaos, since Chaos is predominantly have almost exclusively long-range weaponry, or at least the fastest ship in the game. And even then, these Grand Cruisers don't really have a lot of speed to them. They're basically just as slow as my cruisers. So keeping distance on them should not be too terribly difficult with that said. It's just again a lack of familiarity with not playing against this fleet very often, and mixed up with a series of very poor control on my part, I feel like. Because this fleet relies so heavily on being decisive with my ramming and torpedoes. Since hovering at around 9,000 unit range, or yeah, being in close range or max range is ideal situation for me. Because I can hit them with the lances unhindered at max range, and at close range, my ramming torpedoes should be able to kill off their ships incredibly quickly if I can have multiple ships hit the same target at once. We've seen before with the battleships, we literally had 3 cruisers ram a despoiler, I think without any torpedoes, and I think that thing died in less than 30 seconds. A goddamn battleship of all things. Sure, they have brace for impact to help mitigate that damage, but I feel like that was still sloppy control on my part, and I'm hoping to bounce back from this for my next video, my next series of matches. And with what I hinted at before, if the frigate strategy is very problematic, there is a way to deal with that. I am just going to quickly pause it at the score screen here, because the upgrade I have in mind, or the skill rather, is Augur Disruptor. Keep in mind, this is not going to work for your combat in any way, since the sheer amount of frigates we're dealing with, but if any fleets are fragile to the boarding damage this fleet might utilize, an Augur Disruptor basically negates the enhanced sensor range that they have that allows their frigates to do the boarding assault to your entire fleet. Although, they still have the 4,500 unit range, scanner range, or was it, detection range, I forget what it's called. And you're still going to get boarded at that sweet spot. And with the speed of the frigates, they still probably could board you pretty well, but at least then, you're in a position where maybe you can kill them off all at once, and a call to arms would then help you a lot, as opposed to how it played out in my match, or at least the previous match where I just burnt it for like 3 boarding assaults. A bit of a waste of an ability there, but it's the closest I could think of to a counterplay there. You just gotta somehow kill those ships before it wears off.